I find it absolutely fascinating to see Elon Musk and his team in the Department of Government Efficiency, called DOGE, for taking very quickly a hatchet to numerous U.S. government departments, billions in spending cuts. And in a moment, I'll tell you the relevance to Canada. But first, it's no surprise that the government establishment, led by the Democrats, are fighting back. I mean, after all, come on, there's hundreds of billions of dollars, tens of thousands of government jobs at stake. With the exception of Argentina under Javier Milei, I don't think we've seen anything like this in a Western democracy. I mean, there may be lots to debate, by the way, over the specifics and require a more nuanced examination of the cuts, but I'll leave that for now. And I'm sure some critics have valid concerns and criticisms, but they fail to understand or acknowledge that the waste and ideologically driven spending of U.S. tax dollars that's been exposed with things like U.S. aid has gained widespread public support for any cut. For example, come on, 70,000 for the production of a diversity, equity, and inclusion themed musical in Ireland, 2.5 million for electric vehicles in Vietnam, 47,000 for transgender opera in Colombia, 32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. How about 3 million for a girls-centered climate action in Brazil? I mean, there's so much more. I mean, it really was a huge list, like 20 million to produce a new Sesame Street show in Iraq, 4.5 million to combat misinformation in Kazakhstan. I mean, how about this one? 10 million for meals to an Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group. I mean, and arguably the last straw for a lot of Americans was that the funding for the Wuhan Virology Lab, which now consensus has it, was the origin of COVID-19. I mean, and that list keeps growing. But I think it's important to look at it in the context of a bigger picture. It's fueling a further decline in confidence in government. With tens of millions of Americans struggling financially, this gross misspending of tax dollars takes the decline in confidence and trust to a whole other level. And by the way, I have yet to read or hear a political commentator who understands that declining confidence is the big issue with serious financial, social, political repercussions. I mean, come on, the credibility of Congress and the Senate to scrutinize government spending after authorizing it has taken another hit. Now, time's going to tell whether it's a fatal hit to the entire system of government as we know it. But you know what? My guess is yes. One thing for sure is that there's more to come as they wade into the Department of Defense that hasn't passed an audit since department-wide audits were initiated in 2018. That's failing 7 consecutive audits. Now, some Canadian commentators have chimed in with opposition to the U.S. aid shutdown, but without acknowledging the abuse of taxpayers gives license to any kind of cut. And I want to get the Canadian context here. While we don't have DOGE, we do have an Auditor General. We do have Auditor General's reports, which chronicles outrageous spending. For example, Auditor General Karen Hogan stated looking at the $60 million spent on ArriveCan, the widespread irregularities were, in quote, the worst she has ever seen, displaying, in quotes, a glaring disregard for some of the most basic and fundamental policies and rules and controls. And there's a lot of other examples. The one I keep coming back to is the Green Slush Fund, called the Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Well, the Privy Council had a look at that and estimated that taxpayers lost $150 million through outrageous misspending, rampant cronyism, and corruption. That was right by the findings of the Auditor General when she looked into the program. She cited 90 instances of conflict of interest for 76 million tax dollars gone. Maybe the most outrageous example, though, was one from who was the chairperson of that program, the Sustainable Development Technology Canada, Annette Verschuren. Well, you know what she did? She voted to approve a grant of $217,000 to her own company, a company where she was CEO and major shareholder. And adding insult to injury, by the way, the executives and board members of the Sustainable Development Technology Canada got performance-based bonuses. Now, I'm wondering where the outrage is for that litany of examples, and I could give so many more exposed by the Auditor General, what I think would have most taxpayers wanting to call in the RCMP. But there is rarely any real accountability. It's never been a big issue in any election, never been a question in any of the leaders' debates. I think it should be an embarrassment to the moderators. But let me give you one more thing, at least give you something we could do about it as an example. You see, if our newspapers featured each one of these abominable examples on the front page, and television news had a special feature every week on the misspending, the incompetence, the conflict of interest, I think it would help create some accountability. That would dramatically improve performance and reduce highly questionable behavior. So before we look across the border, or we can look across the border and be entertained, remember, we could be doing the same thing here, but there's no sign it will happen. Certainly nothing like what Elon Musk and the Doge teams are doing in the US. But there doesn't seem to be any appetite for it in Canada amongst our politicians. But I wonder about the rest of us.